Okay, today I'm going to call this update Prophecy Leaks. I don't know that it has any significance. It's just a shameless exploitation or try to tie into something popular in the culture, WikiLeaks. So maybe it ties in, maybe it doesn't. You may not have noticed it's been an interesting week again. And there was a lot happened just in the last 2 days. And I've been sitting here all morning since about 3 a.m. feverishly trying to add and edit and cut things out. So I know I've got way too much, and we'll get out of here on a reasonable time. Although today my wife is down in West Virginia helping take care of my new great nephew who was born Thursday afternoon. And so I don't have my signal in the back because you can't see her, but the only thing she's lacking is an orange vest and those things, and sometimes she's out there, she's doing this, which means you've made your point, bring it in for a landing. And so I don't have that break on me today, so it'll be kind of fun, really. But I see her back there out of the corner of my eye. Although last week I was up here, I don't know if you noticed, I was just sweating like crazy because I wore a coat. And I'm back there, I'm going like this and looking at her, and she's right over her head. And so I got her signal straight. She doesn't have mine yet. So anyway, we talk each week about the convergence of events. And as we've gone along here in the last few weeks, it becomes more and more apparent that these events are converging and even accelerating. Just something humorous to start off with. Somebody sent me a picture of this and said maybe I could step up my presentations on Sunday by buying this, the Rob Bell Everything is Spiritual Whiteboard from his Everything is Spiritual tour. It's currently being sold on eBay. Last I checked, the bids were over $1,500. There were some humorous comments when I posted this on my Facebook page. For example, somebody said, well, it looks like a less than sign. And then somebody said, I said, well, are we sure that that's Rob Bell? Maybe it's Sinead O'Conner. And I had a picture on you can look at my Facebook page. When they have glasses on, they look remarkably alike. And I'm not sure that they're not the same person, which means that's my first original conspiracy theory. And then the other is, it's clear from this where he's going is that he has expanded on his original point quite a bit. So if somebody wants to buy that, go ahead. I don't want it. I'll talk a little bit about this today too, near the beginning, because this is, again, this verse we talk about a lot, that as it was in the days of Lot, so shall it also be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And the fact that Lot was really vexed in his soul by what he saw going on around him. I thought that since we've got some people watching that didn't used to watch, and there's some new people here, I'd kind of go back and look at an example that I have used. Although using the baseball stadium as an example gives me the chance to point out that the Cleveland Indians are up 3-1 in the World Series. So we're grateful for that. But the example that I've used is, one of the things in Bible prophecy is that it does show us that there will be a convergence and an acceleration of prophetic events as we get closer to the return of the Lord. It happened when Jesus came the first time, and we know that to a Jewish mind, prophecy is pattern. And so the pattern at his first coming was that many prophecies about the coming of Jesus were fulfilled. They started with, essentially, they'd been in existence for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands. With the birth of John the Baptist, they started to be fulfilled. And they were fulfilled throughout the life of the Messiah. But about 60% of the prophecies related to his first coming were fulfilled in the last week. So there was this exponential growth. So to give you an example of exponential growth that's very simple is, and I always like this one because I grew up around Cleveland, and one of the things we didn't like were the Yankees. So let's pretend that we can make Yankee Stadium watertight. And we're going to chain that guy that messed up the World Series or the playoffs for the Cubs the last time. We'll chain him to the top. I'm sure the Cubs fans would appreciate that. We'll chain him to the top row of the stadium. And what we're going to do is we're going to go out to second base with a magic eyedropper. Remember, the stadium is completely watertight. And we're going to start at noon. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a drop of water, and then a minute later we will do 2 drops of water, then another minute later 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, and on and on and on. So the question is if we start with 1 drop of water at noon, at what time will the person chained to the top row drown? And often the answer is, well, it's going to take a day or more to fill that up. But to show you how things grow exponentially, the answer is that he has really less than 50 minutes to get free or he drowns. And that's starting with 1 drop of water. That shows you exponential growth. And the interesting thing is that the stadium, just a few minutes before that, is 97% empty. So it goes from half full to completely full to overflowing in just 1 minute. So it just shows you how quickly things go. And that's similar to how these things will unfold in Bible prophecy. Everything is going to accelerate. And I think we see that week by week. So let's look at some of the things that are going on this week. I will touch on politics because it's where we live in America, and we have some things going on there. But there are some things going on in the church that I want to talk about too. This is another one. We know earthquakes is a sign of the end times and an increase in earthquakes. And it does seem like this is going on around the world. There are people who study it. Here's another major earthquake in Italy just this morning. I think I picked this off the internet about 7 a.m. and it had just happened. A lot of massive damage. In terms of the Luke chapter 17 stuff, the days of Lot, the justices of the Supreme Court have agreed to hear the case from, I believe it's Virginia, where the school district instituted this transgender bathroom policy. Parents were upset with it. They challenged it. The Court of Appeals in Virginia said, well, the Obama administration has said this, it has to be interpreted this way. So we have to go along with the Obama administration because, of course, they could never get anything wrong or they could never do anything self-serving or political. Now, I talked to you last week about the court down in Texas, which said, when they use sex discrimination in the statute, sex means the difference between male and female. It doesn't mean expanding it out to everything in the world. And this is the problem when you have postmodern people running things that do things based on feeling. They don't think. They don't care about truth. And they'll say, oh, well, we have to honor people's feelings and that's love. That's not love. Without truth, there's no love. Same as without truth, there's really no gospel. So I want to play you a short clip that was up on the BBC yesterday to kind of show you what I think is the scope of the problem.
The single most common question I get asked is, are you a boy or are you a girl? The simple answer is no. But then the response after that is usually a very confused, what? So here is the explanation. I am non-binary, and that means I identify as something other than male or female. Our society and history has led us to believe over thousands of years that there are only people who are male and people who are female. But that is because past society has based gender on physical sex.
Let me see what it is, nurse. Ah, yes, what a strapping young lad.
It's outdated. The truth is that gender is in the brain, and physical sex is a completely separate and different thing that is private to every individual. What people really mean when they're asking the boy or girl question is creepily, "So, what genitals do you have?" People need to realize it doesn't matter what living meat skeleton you've been born in, it's what you feel that defines you. Non-binary is a blanket term for anyone who identifies out with the binary gender. There are endless ways of being non-binary, and no two people identify in the same way. So just remember, gender is what you feel, not what your parts are. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Bye, guys.
Now, I am offended that that person used guys at the end. She's living at, see, this is the problem with thinking like that. Look, I have tremendous sympathy for someone who is so massively confused. They need help. They need the Lord. Without that, they are lost. But what our society is doing by pushing this nonsense is creating more and more confusion among people and young people. And as I've shared with you some of the things following that, engendering that thought in young people who struggle with this, Dr. Paul McHugh, who used to be at Johns Hopkins, professor emeritus there, who studied this his whole life, says that's child abuse. So that's where I come down. So don't tell me that you love this person by engendering, by giving support to their confusion. You don't. But this is madness. Somebody sent me a link. I didn't have time to work on it this morning, from Israel this morning, about a pastor or someone who had done a blog back in May of 2015. And this pastor said, our culture is changing. It'll no longer have a semblance of Christianity to it. Christianity will be vilified, laughed at, scorned. And the acceleration, the happening of this event will overtake the church, and they won't even know what happened. That was in May of 2015. The Supreme Court same-sex decision came down about 6 weeks after that blog went up. And here we are now with society that is just so massively confused. This is a demographic thing. The National Review has this new issue called The Blue Wave, and essentially what they've said, and this is what I've talked a lot about, is one of the interesting things that's kind of tracking along with all these prophetic events is the massive change in demographics in the world. Judeo-Christian culture has less and less influence. Europe is completely gone. There's hardly any Christian influence left there except in small pockets here and there. The same thing's happening in our country. And the people who would propagate that through children are having fewer and fewer children. And so the people who are opposed to that have more, and it's shifting the way everything is happening. And National Review and other magazines and commentators have pointed out that this really is the last chance for a Republican to be elected probably in the next 1 or 2 lifetimes because of the demographics. Now, we can hope and pray that that changes, but for 40-some years, this cultural Marxism has been shoved down the throats of students, college students, high school, grade school, kindergarten students, and it's not going to change overnight unless there is a massive revival, and I just don't see that happening. One of the places it plays out is in the church. Now, this is a lady named Jen Hatmaker. She did a show on HGTV about remodeling a house. I think she and her husband have 5 kids, some natural, some adopted. And Jonathan Merritt, who is the son of a former head of the Southern Baptist Convention. He writes for Huffington Post and Christianity Today and a number of magazines. Did an interview of her just recently. And she has some popular books. She's a very popular speaker at Christian women conferences, talking on the Bible. Her books have been sold at Lifeway and other Christian bookstores, and she's very popular. So this interview says this, and there's some stunning things in here, and I'll tie these together in just a moment. Politically speaking, do you support gay marriage? Answer. From a civil rights and civil liberties side and from just a human being side, any two adults have the right to choose who they want to love, and they should be afforded the same legal protections as any of us. I would never wish anything less for my gay friends. From a spiritual perspective, since gay marriage is legal in all 50 states, our communities have plenty of gay couples who, just like the rest of us, need marriage support and parenting and help in Christian community. They are either going to find those resources in the church or they are not. If an LGBT friend of yours got married, would you attend that wedding? I would attend the wedding with gladness, and I would drink champagne. I want the very best for my gay friends. I want love and happiness and faithfulness and commitment and community. Yes, that's an easy answer. You're a mother of a multi-ethnic family. What are your thoughts on Black Lives Matter? I'm a supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I am deeply embedded in that conversation. Now, so here's a post by Margaret Feinberg, who has done tremendous damage to the theology and doctrine of many women in the church. She's very popular in emergent circles. So she tweets, she sees what Jen Hatmaker has said in that article, and she teaches at these conferences too, like Jen Hatmaker does. And Christian women from conservative evangelical churches go to these things by the thousands. There's a conference called If Gathering, I think it is. And she says, I'm honored to be in such great company. And she gets Joy Brunke, Beth Moore, and Voskamp. Now you need to go back and look at Pastor Steve's talk from about a year and a half ago on Ann Voskamp and Sarah Young. Very well done, highly recommend it. And so what does Beth Moore say? She tweets, me too, Margaret, I'm glad to be in such company. Now, I've gotten a lot of criticism for saying things about Beth Moore. I'm presenting to you the facts about Beth Moore. And if you're a fan, you need to take that, what she says and what she does and how she acts into consideration. And look at her works in the light of this nonsense. Unbiblical nonsense. Now, here's what Jen Hatmaker had said back in 2014. This article says, the 42-year-old has long advocated that Christians show greater empathy, compassion, and outreach to their LGBT neighbors. In a Facebook post, her 600,000 plus followers last April, this would have been in 2014, I think, she extended a message of love to LGBT folks, saying, there's nothing wrong with you, or in any case, nothing more right or wrong than any of us. After the fallout of World Vision's 2014 decision to allow and then not allow, remember that dust up where they said, oh yeah, and you can be in a same-sex marriage and work for World Vision, and then they backed off on it. Hatmaker had called for a more gracious conversation on the issue and later clarified her position. I want you to know that I land on the side of traditional marriage as God's first and clear design. I believe God's original creation is how we were crafted to thrive in marriage, in family, and in community, which is borne out for millennia in scripture, interpretation, practice, and society within and without the church. That was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half. She does not hold to that position now. Is that clear? She has changed. She has fallen away from the truth. I found this on a tweets of somebody that I know. And Matthew Vine says, let us be clear, being LGBT affirming is the future of the church, including the evangelical church, and praise God for that. And then this other person, Chris Scott, said this: the future of Christianity belongs to the Thomas Merton kind of Christian, not the heirs of Jerry Falwell. And that's a very interesting comment, because we have talked a lot here about mysticism. And Thomas Merton and Richard Foster are the godfathers, and also Thomas Keating, are the godfathers of the modern mysticism movement within the Christian church, including evangelical churches and colleges and seminaries. And we have talked about that a lot, but let me just remind you of a little bit. When the Pope came to Washington a year ago, it seems like it was like 5 years ago with all that's happened since. It was just a year ago that he came and he spoke in front of Congress, and he got up and he said, he identified 3 people that were great examples for the young people of the world to follow. They were Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, a radical leftist communist who used Catholicism as a kind of mask to hide what she was really about, and Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was here's what the Pope said in his speech to Congress. Merton was above all a man of prayer, a thinker who challenged the certitudes of his time and opened new horizons for souls for the church. He was also a man of dialogue, a promoter of peace between peoples and religions. And this is Thomas Merton. He lived in a monastery down around Louisville, Kentucky. He said this: during a conference on contemplative prayer, the question was put to Thomas Merton, how can we best help people to attain union with God? His answer was very clear. We must tell them that they are already united with God. Contemplative prayer is nothing other than coming into consciousness of what is already there. Here's a little clip to promote a biographical documentary of Merton.
Once the nightclubs of New York had been his haunt. Then he became a Trappist monk living in rural Kentucky. Though in seclusion for 27 years, he had become recognized internationally as a spiritual master. Admirers celebrated him.
Merton was what we would call a seer. He saw at a higher level, and that's why a lot of his books.
This Richard War is also very popular in emergent circles. And folks, let me just say this. This is all apostasy. This is apostasy. And I'm telling you that this is why a Jen Hatmaker gets away with it in the church with these positions. She's more into the mysticism, which is the promotion of herself, than the promotion of God's truth. And Pastor Steve, if I get too far off, you can step in and tell me that I'm being too mean. After I'm done.
40 years later are still current, 50 years, 60 years later, particularly in the rediscovery of the contemplative tradition. He almost reintroduced the word. He pulled back the veil and retrieved it for us.
Others labeled Merton a radical, a renegade who was leading faithful readers astray.
When I told my pastor, the church I was at in Cleveland, that Merton had died, he says, well, maybe God took him so he couldn't do any more harm.
As 1968 begins, Merton is living as a hermit. From his home in the Kentucky woods, his writing on spiritual matters, social justice issues, and cultural concerns reaches a readership of millions.
I have a past to break with. An accumulation of inertia, waste, junk. A great need of clarification, of mindfulness, or rather of no mind. A need for the spirit.
A part of Merton's restlessness is a desire to communicate one-on-one with Asian spiritual practitioners. He has come to see going beyond the divisions of West and East as the defining work of his life. Now, in October of 1968, Merton does go to Asia, a pilgrim seeking insight and communion.
So he came to see us, India, and then he went to Thailand. This time, this moment, very, very important. Closer contact. Now, as a result of sort of closer relation, they automatically, mutual respect automatically come. So I often describe him as a very, very strong bridge between Catholic monk, Catholic tradition, and Buddhist tradition.
And so Merton went on this pilgrimage to worship with his Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhism brothers. And he died while he was there. And his death, he was 53, was significant enough that it made the front page, you saw the paper there, of the New York Times. This man has destroyed the faith of thousands, tens of thousands, and continues to do so through his influence and his acceptance in the evangelical church through guys like Richard Foster. Another guy who's very popular is Thomas Keating, a Catholic Trappist monk, who is here teaching in what? In front of a statue of Buddha. This stuff, this mysticism, destroys the ability of people to see the truth. It is destroying the faith of thousands, tens of thousands, even today. And Christian church and ministry and seminary and college, after seminary and college and church and ministry, is promoting this stuff without any restraint. I went to a large church over here. I think you know which one I mean, over there in Westerville. A mandatory night for their leadership to come and listen to Richard Foster. All their leaders had to come. I went. Dr. Ruth Haley Barton, who used to be the director of spiritual formation at a big church that's very influential in evangelical circles, Willow Creek. This is her webpage. She says here that she got her training, and folks, I'm telling you, in Southern Baptist and Grace Brethren and other places, Ruth Haley Barton is very, very popular. They read her books, they promote her books, they teach her stuff, and she is into mysticism. Look at what her own webpage says. Her training came from the Shalom Institute of Spiritual Formation. What's the Shalom Institute? She talks about, to learn more about the ministry of spiritual direction, we recommend the following resources: Sacred Companions by David Benner, Spiritual Director, Spiritual Companion by Tilden Edwards, who is a ranked New Age non-Christian, Holy Listening, Margaret Gunther, Exploring Spiritual Direction, Alan Jones, and there you see Spiritual Direction and Meditation by Thomas Merton. And there is Ruth Haley Barton speaking at the chapel at Biola University a couple of years ago. Another person who's taken up her mantle is Phileena Hurwitz. I've talked about her a number of times. And here she is being interviewed at the Catalyst Conference, Andy Stanley's conference in Dallas 2014. This stuff is destroying the faith of many, and that is why Margaret Feinberg in 1 year can flip from a traditional view of marriage to an apostate view. Now, I don't know if I have it in here. I may be a little bit out of order. I don't think I have it in here. So, to Lifeway's credit, and a lot of people wonder whether Lifeway has any standards at all, Lifeway pulled her books, all of her books, out of all of their stores across the country. So I'm grateful that Lifeway did that. I would only suggest Lifeway, you got a lot more work to do for the stuff that you have there. This stuff is toxic. And it permeates, so if the church can't stand up against it, what do you think is going to happen in the culture? And when it starts to tip, is it going to go fast? It's not going to go fast. It has gone fast. It's so quick, it's head spinning. And a lot of people in the evangelical church, they don't realize it because they sit there and they think, well, I've gone to this church for 40 years and it was okay. And so what they do is they sit there and they pretend in their minds that they're going to the church that it was 40 years ago. But it's not the church that it was 40 years ago. It's changed. You're the frog in the kettle. Get out. If you think it won't do to you what it did to Margaret Feinberg and Jen Hatmaker and Ruth Haley Barton and Lynn Hybels, you're naive. You need to flee that stuff. Run away. Find someplace else for the protection of you, your family, and your children. I hope that's clear. Here's this thing in England, Ireland. Christians told to choose beliefs or prophets after the gay cake row. They refused to bake a cake. They were fined. They lost their appeal. And now here's Christians who want to apply their religious beliefs. Somebody in charge of the discrimination agency in Ireland said this: Christians who want to apply their religious beliefs in the business world must be prepared to make sacrifices. The head of the organization that took a bakery to court for refusing to make a pro-gay marriage cake has insisted. Dr. Michael Wardlow, head of the state-funded Equality Commission for Northern Ireland, said, Christians are not the only people who hold strong values and cannot expect exceptions from anti-discrimination law. Now, to his credit, I think it was the Daily Mail, might have been the Guardian, said the Belfast Bakery was wrong, but it had a right to be so. It said this, but that is not the only way in which this question could be examined. We may well think that the Asher's Bakery are bigots or fundamentalists, but the other principle at issue is one of free speech. And I might add, the free exercise of religion, which last I heard are both in our Constitution, in the First Amendment, in the Bill of Rights. The law against discrimination says that they may not refuse service to anyone because of their sexual orientation. That's entirely right. It is further arguable that they should not be able to discriminate against anyone because of their political views. But what is at stake here, as Peter Tatchell has pointed out, is also a principle of free speech. They were being asked to make a statement in favor of gay marriage with which they profoundly disagreed, and here they ought to have had the right to disagree. And I'm very grateful for the people at Asher's Bakery. When they talked about it, they clearly stated where they were coming from and why they believed what they believed. So praise the Lord, the message got out to people who were listening. And this is what's coming. I talked about this a few weeks ago. Peaceful coexistence, reconciling non-discrimination principles with civil liberties. Because if you think Ireland's an outlier, you don't understand. Our Civil Rights Commission would do it the exact, and has said in this 306-page document, they will do it the same way. So, this pastor or blogger who in May of 2015, a year and a half ago, said that this was going to come quickly, he looks pretty prophetic right now. And that acceleration is happening. So, Dr. Wardlow told the Daily Telegraph that if rigid believers running businesses want to avoid a conflict between their faith and their legal duty to serve the public equally, the message was that they must be prepared to make financial sacrifices. In other words, you can go bankrupt because free speech and free exercise of religion mean nothing to us. And it's here in America, and it's coming, so you just need to be aware. This is another one. This is from the Daily Mail. Dad slams charity meddlers in new case of mother dressing boy as girl. Social workers have accused us of abuse because we don't want our daughter to have a sex change at age 14. The government knows more than you people do. They are anti-science. Dr. McHugh has said that over and over again. The child abusers in this case are the public agencies that run around, oh, we love this child. We just want to help this child feel fulfilled, to feel comfortable. Research shows over 90%, well over 90%, if you treat them as a boy or a girl, they will eventually act as a boy or a girl and not have any future problems. You do a sex change, a sex reassignment surgery, and they are 22 times more likely to commit suicide than if those who do not have sex reassignment surgery. 22 times. Don't you dare tell me that you love them by letting them do this. Now, this is Jensen Bushman, my new great-nephew. He was born about 70 hours ago. And you may say this is shameless exploitation. Okay, fine. Listen. There is a candidate running for office who said that 70 hours ago you could rip this kid's brains out and rip his hands off and rip his arms off and kill him. That is immoral. That is murder. Anybody who claims to be a Christian and votes for somebody who supports killing a precious kid like that is not a Christian in my view. You are messed up. And you need to get right with God if you can support that in any way. So don't tell me that there aren't issues at stake in this election. There are imperfect candidates, but there are important issues. Just checking my heart rate. Okay. Let's talk about this real quickly. I could do about 4 hours on this. James Comey, thank you for turning down the thing there. I really care about this stuff. I really do. So I apologize if I offend somebody, but if you're offended by that, then you got a problem in my view. So I'll talk to you about it, and when we talk about it, I'll tell you you're wrong. So, and I'm a lawyer. I love arguments, okay? My whole life is an argument. So it is. I mean, so it doesn't bother me if you disagree with me. For a while, it doesn't bother me. Then it really gets me a little. James Comey wrote this letter to the House where he had testified about the investigation of Hillary's emails, saying that they were reopening the investigation. The Clinton camp is all upset. He had no right to do this. He's violating DOJ policy. I don't care I don't even care that much about Loretta Lynch's stupid DOJ policy. Okay? I care about the law. I promised when I got my license to practice law that I would uphold the law and the Constitution. Loretta Lynch doesn't care about it. She's a political hack. There are important issues at stake in this election. It was interesting on Thursday, I think it was, Wednesday or Thursday, the New York Times editorial page, Frank Brunei, who hates Christians, by the way, Clinton's resounding mandate. How's it going today, Frank? And they found, I've heard over 10,000 emails on Huma Abedin's server. Some reports this morning are, I haven't been able to confirm them, that she's seeking an immunity deal to testify against Hillary and Obama. She has been the constant companion of Hillary Clinton for almost 20 years. Hillary introduced her to her husband, and they found him because they're investigating the husband for Anthony Weiner for sexting an underage girl. And so they found all these devices that she had not turned over, and there were emails all over them. And listen, Comey's not going to go out on a limb like this unless there's something really there behind it. These aren't duplicate emails. And so don't pay any attention to the Clinton spin machine. because they're as corrupt as they come. And Huma Abedin, I mean, she and Hillary share a private compartment on the plane where no one else is allowed. This is weird, folks. This is strange. And Huma Abedin, there are massive security concerns about her. Her parents helped start, were very prominent in the Muslim Brotherhood. She herself worked for a Muslim Brotherhood-funded journal that promoted Sharia law and that sort of thing. And the thinking was, if Hillary gets elected, she's chief of staff at the White House. Point, there are important issues at stake in this election, apart from the candidates. You need to keep that in mind. And I don't know whose. This was in the Wall Street Journal front page the other day. Governor Terry McAuliffe, we talked about him and his pardoning of a number of prisoners down in Virginia so to give them their voting rights back. He's not doing it because he cares about them. He's doing it because he wants Hillary to win the election. He was a campaign manager for Bill Clinton. So what do we find out this week? McAuliffe's PAC that he controls and the Democratic Party in Virginia that he controls, gave $750,000 to a female candidate for office in Virginia, who just happens to be the wife of the deputy director of the FBI who is heading up the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. There's no return expected. My understanding is that the Comey came forward because there was essentially a mutiny among career FBI agents who care about the law and justice and truth. And he was to put that down and to save his own reputation, he had to come forward. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. Kimberly Strassel had a great editorial on Thursday or Friday in the Wall Street Journal, Grifters in Chief, talking about the corruption, the financial corruption of the Clinton Foundation. She talked yesterday in the Journal editorial report. I'll play just a brief part of that clip from Fox. It does start off with some quotes from a certain person, so just be forewarned.
The director himself has said he doesn't know whether the emails referenced in his letter are significant or not. I'm confident, whatever they are, will not change the conclusion reached in July.
Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, columnist and Manhattan Institute senior fellow Jason Riley, editorial board member Joe Rago, and columnist Kim Strassel. So Kim, FBI Director Comey told his agents this week in a memo that Fox News has obtained that he felt obliged as a public duty to release this information to Congress before the election. How do you read that?
Look, I mean, it's very hard to know what's going on here. You have to assume, given the upheaval that has attended this, and given that it was obvious it was going to cause a political firestorm, that there must be something there pertinent enough or concerning enough that he felt they did need to move ahead with this and tell Congress. But you also have to wonder if this isn't also maybe a little...
By the way, this is a very good columnist, a very intelligent young lady. And I highly recommend that you read her stuff. She actually did a video recently for Prager University. They put it up. It was sort of along the lines of the things that she's talking about. And guess what? Within hours, YouTube flagged it as adult content, inappropriate material for children. They're fascist. And I say that at some risk. Prager University has the most popular YouTube channel, like 140 million views. This year we'll maybe do 2 million, so they're 70 times our size, and they're fantastic videos. Okay, so here, let's continue with Kimberly.
bit of a cover your backside effort by Mr. Comey. As details have come out about the first FBI probe and all of the incredible irregularities of it, and Congress now looking into that, he may have felt the need to cover his tracks, as it were, and make it look as though they really were being a little bit more thorough than it would seem they have been.
But Kim, you know, the thing is, I sort of lean to the first one because he's taking an enormous amount of abuse for this. So if this turns out to be nothing, if this turns out to be just, you know, about yoga and what do you do on Thursday night, I mean, he's going to be.
Does Hillary Clinton look like she does yoga? Okay, I get lots of emails too. Okay, I'm only asking a question. You draw your own conclusions. You know. Look, I love golf. I don't have 33,000 emails about golf and food and all that stuff. It's inconceivable. We know what was going on.
Really under the hot seat.
Well, and look, Clinton's comments there, they are spin. We don't know. I mean, she's trying to make it sound as though he has no clue, it's unrelated. There is no way he would have made that announcement without having some good grounds for believing that whatever is on these electronic devices is an immediate bearing on the investigation they were doing.
And Dan, what about that point, though?
And here is a letter also coming out on Friday from Congress of the United States to the Honorable Loretta Lynch, Attorney General. And it says this: she was ordered by the court to respond to questions in writing. Listen to what happened. I don't know if you heard this or not. I mean, always got to be paying attention on Friday because that's when they dump all this stuff because they figure it won't get watched. We received your reply to our October 7 letter regarding your role and your department's actions in facilitating billions of dollars in payments to Iran. It is frankly unacceptable that your department refuses to answer straightforward questions from the people's elected representatives in Congress about an important national security issue. Your staff failed to address any of our questions and instead provided a copy of public testimony and a lecture about the sensitivity of information associated with this issue. As the United States Chief Law Enforcement Officer, it is outrageous that you would essentially plead the Fifth and refuse to respond to inquiries regarding your role in providing cash to the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. The actions of your department come at a time when Iran continues to hold Americans hostage and unjustly sentence them to prison. We are reattaching our original letter and respectfully request that you answer our 13 questions in an honest and thorough way. We're seeking clarity on conflicting information from the administration's private and public comments on this issue, requesting documents and requesting information regarding American victims of Iranian terrorism. As elected representatives, we take our professional responsibility seriously and hope you will do so as well. We look forward to receiving a serious response back to you no later than November 4. Democratic Coalition Against Trump came out, and they're trying to take down Comey. Charles Krauthammer came out with an article in Breitbart, said that Clinton set up the server to hide dirty business and rank corruption of the Clinton Foundation. Daily Caller said this from a D.C. attorney. It was reported this morning that the FBI never destroyed the laptops of Clinton's aides, like Cheryl Mills. They were supposed to under that use immunity agreement, and they didn't. Chicago Tribune, Hillary Clinton's hometown newspaper, came out yesterday and said Hillary Clinton should step aside. The Secretary of State, she kept classified documents on the homebrew server in her basement, which is against the law. She lied about it to the American people. She couldn't remember details dozens of times when questioned by the FBI. Her aides destroyed evidence by bleach bit and hammers. Her husband, Bill, met secretly on an airport tarmac with Attorney General Loretta Lynch for about a half hour, and all they said they talked about was golf and the grandkids. And there was no prosecution of Hillary. This isn't merely wrong and unethical, it is poisonous. And then Huma Abedin was nowhere to be seen on the Clinton plane yesterday, and there's word that she's seeking a thing. So look, there's a lot of questions. I could go on and on and on and on. There's supposed to be WikiLeaks disclosures by Tuesday. You might want to pay attention to that. They say they have all 33,000 of these emails that were deleted, and we'll be able to see whether Hillary Clinton lied about the emails being about yoga and recipes and grandkids. 33,000 of them. So what happens? Okay, let me give you just a quick legal summary. There could be an indictment, but that has to come from a grand jury. I don't know that they'll get a grand jury and panel before the election. So if she's going to be charged with the crime, that has to happen. I personally don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible that it could be severe enough. I mean, but they got to get somebody in the Department of Justice to do an attorney to do the grand jury. Do you think Loretta Lynch is going to, Loretta Lynch, as corrupt as she is, she's going to let that happen? No. So let's say there's no indictment, the election goes forward, and there's one of two scenarios right now. There might be a third, but it's so remote I'm not even going to talk about it. Hillary could be elected President of the United States. But now in the intervening time, or after she takes office in January, could she be indicted? It's a real possibility that a new sheriff, well, if she's president, she's not going to get indicted. So she's going to be president. The only alternative then is impeachment. I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's say she doesn't get elected and Trump is elected. His DOJ, in January, they convene a grand jury on day one, and 2 days later, they indict Hillary Clinton on all these charges. How do they prevent that from happening? All they have to do to prevent that from happening is to have Obama, on his way out the door, issue a pardon. It's also possible, I think I've seen some people say this, that she could pardon herself. She probably would, since she views herself more as a queen than a president, I'm sure, by that point. So what are the Republicans' options then? They can't indict her. Can they impeach her? And the answer is yes. They can get articles of impeachment. They can pass it through the House, and then it goes to a trial in the Senate. Now, Obama, the pardon power is pretty much absolute. There's one exception to it. There doesn't have to be a charge. There doesn't have to be an indictment. There doesn't have to be a conviction or anything like that. It just has to be a crime that appears to have been committed, and you can be pardoned for it, for things in the past, not for going forward, but for things in the past. Think Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was pardoned. I don't think there'd been any charge against him. He was coming up on impeachment in the Congress, but they put these things. He resigned so they would avoid the impeachment trial and all that. Lincoln, he pardoned all the Confederate soldiers at the end of the Civil War. Nobody had been charged with anything yet, and he did. But the only exception to the absolute pardon power of the president is impeachment. They cannot do anything to avoid an impeachment. So let's say the Republicans, they hold the House of Representatives, they get the impeachment drawn up, it goes to trial in the Senate. This is where the problem comes in. If the Republicans still control the Senate, there's a chance, but you got to get 67 senators, which is going to include probably 15 or 16 Democrats, will have to switch and vote for impeachment. And then if you get impeachment, you end up with Tim Kaine. So it's really, it's not a lot of good options. So as I told somebody yesterday, if you don't want to go through all this, make sure she doesn't get elected president. And then it's irrelevant, okay? Okay, so let's look at some of these things going on in the Middle East. This UNESCO thing, I'll finish in 10 minutes, since we got a pretty late start here because of the computer issues, internet issues today. Interesting statement of Pope Francis. He says this to the Israeli ambassador: God promised the land to the people of Israel. But at the same time, UNESCO is saying, well, there's really no Jewish evidence of anything there. Melanie Phillips, I don't have time to go into her editorial in the Jerusalem Post the other day, Palestinians step up the jihad of the lie. And I love Melanie Phillips. She's like Kimberly Strassel. She's like Caroline Glick. She's very honest, blunt, to the point, and she speaks the truth. So the U.S. is now on the UN Human Rights Council and is calling for the end of anti-Israeli bias. That's good. Interesting article from a guy from Chicago. He says erasing history. And he goes and he talks about a gentleman, Mr. Hassan, who was up back in 2000. There was this last push in the Clinton administration. Remember, there were a series of meetings. There was Y River, then there was the Camp David meetings in 2000 during the election cycle. And he had Arafat and Prime Minister Ehud Barak was coming in, Barak's leaving, and everybody's trying to get this done. Because Arafat's starting to be in bad health, and Barak's leaving office probably soon. And Barak was, so there was a guy, he was up to be the head of Shin Bet, but he never made it to the head of the Israeli Shin Bet service. So, but as part of he was on the team that went to Y River, and at Y River, his name is, now I'm forgetting his first name, Hassan. And so what he did was he went through in great detail looking at the old city of Jerusalem and how that could possibly be divided in a peace agreement. It's interesting that now Mr. Hassan has another position in Israel, and he is the director of antiquities. The old stuff, the stuff they're digging up that shows the Jewish connection to everything. So it says this: ahead of the summit, Hassan toured the old city and studied every nook and cranny to try to come up with a plan as viable as possible on how to divide the city, if a deal would be reached. Just as important, he spent days poring over ancient Islamic texts where he found various references to Jerusalem and the Haikal Suleiman, Arabic for Solomon's temple. And they even issued a thing back in the 20s about the Jewish history of the Temple Mount, the Palestinians, the Arabs. Then and today, the debate over Jerusalem has always been mixed with ignorance and evilness, Hassan recalled this week. The Palestinians used to tell me, prove to us that the temple was really there. I would say to them, our faith is not up for negotiation. I spoke to Hassan on Wednesday, just hours after the UNESCO vote, and coincidentally, after the Antiquities Authority announced the discovery of an ancient papyrus written in Hebrew and dating back to the kingdom of Judah in the 7th century BC, before the Babylonian captivity. They have found a papyrus fragment, the period of the first temple. And they had planned on announcing this. It was an academic thing, because it was found a while ago and it's been verified. So Wednesday they're doing it, and just after they do it, UNESCO says there's no Jewish connection to the Temple Mount. Coincidence is not a kosher word, as they say in Israel. The papyrus has Jerusalem written on it, and what is the earliest extra-biblical source mentioning the Jewish capital in Hebrew. And here's a picture of it. You can see how small it is. So, Hassan said this: all around us there are attempts by different people and organizations to erase history and culture. It started with the Taliban and ISIS destruction in Iraq and Syria. UNESCO is trying to do the same just by diplomatic efforts. Hassan claimed that the announcement regarding the discovery of the papyrus coincidentally fell on the same day as the UNESCO vote. I think somebody else was working behind the scenes to get this all arranged. And that it had been scheduled months before to coincide with an academic conference, but he said the point got across. The more we dig throughout Israel, the more we find scientific support of our historical roots in this land. I have yet to find proof of Palestinian roots to this land. There's one lesson the editorial continues from Israel's history as a state and the decades of terror it has faced. It is that while terrorists might start their attacks against Israel, they quickly move on to other countries, other faiths, and other people. Israel might be chosen first, but when hundreds of people are then murdered in Paris, London, or New York, the targets become one and the same. some of these countries still have some difficulty recognizing that we are all aligned in the same battle of the free world against the forces of radical Islamic terror. To allow resolutions like UNESCO to pass is another failure to recognize just that. They might start with Jerusalem, but they will quickly move on. In this morning's New York Times, Roger Cohen has an article, an editorial called "Why Israel Still Refuses to Choose." Because they have this fantasy that they can have a two-state solution, but folks, there's already a two-state solution. You understand that? There's Israel and there's Jordan. That was the land set aside for the Palestinian Arabs. Jordan, who used to have control, the royal family there used to have control of Mecca and Medina, they got shoved out by the Saud family, so they needed a place, so they gave them Jordan, and they didn't want the Palestinian Arabs either. They killed, King Hussein of Jordan killed them. They discriminate against them. They keep them locked up in these refugee camps. So it's not really a two-state solution, because they've got the state. It's just not where they want it necessarily. So there's Israel and there's Jordan. Now they want a Palestinian state, so it's really a three-state solution when you get right down to it. And really, they want Gaza to be separate, so that would make it a four-state solution. And all the people in power say that this is how they're going to do this. There is agreement on very little in the fractious Holy Land. When it says, but on the issue, on one issue, there is near unanimity these days. A two-state resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is more distant than ever, so unimaginable that it appears little more than an illusion sustained by lazy thinking, interest in the status quo, or plain exhaustion. From Tel Aviv to Ramallah to the West Bank, from the largely Arab city of Nazareth to Jerusalem, I find virtually nobody on either side prepared to offer anything but a negative assessment of the two-state idea. Diagnoses range from moribund to clinically dead. Next year, it will be half a century since the Israeli occupation of the West Bank began. More than 370,000 settlers now live there, excluding East Jerusalem, up from about 249,000 in 2005. The incorporation of all the biblical land of Israel has advanced too far for too long to be reversed now. Greater Israel is what the Israelis know. The smaller Israel west of the Green Line that emerged from 1947-49 War of Independence is a fading memory. The right-wing government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with its contempt for Palestinians and dissenting voices in general, prefers things the way the steady expansion of settlements demonstrates. Greater Israel is what Israelis know. The smaller Israel west... Whoops, I read that one. Caroline Glick, on her Facebook page this morning, said, Roger Cohen, you should do yourself a favor and read my book, The Israeli Solution. Since you clearly haven't, your column in today's New York Times is ignorant and sort of a kind of whiny and pathetic. Was she clear? She made reference to a scene in I can do this because my wife's not here. She hates this movie, Godfather 2. This is what Michael Corleone said about his brother Fredo.
I don't want anything to happen to him while my mother's alive.
I don't want anything to happen to my brother while my mother is alive. So what happens in the movie? The mother dies, and what happens? Bye-bye Fredo, right? So she goes on. So she builds on this. She says, last week it was reported that the Obama administration has delivered a message to the Palestinian Authority. The administration has warned the Palestinian Authority that the U.S. will veto any anti-Israel resolution brought before the UN Security Council before the U.S. presidential elections on November 8th. Message received. You see what the Obama administration is doing? After that election, what are they going to do? Open season on Israel at the Security Council will commence November 9th. The Palestinians are planning appropriately. Israel needs to plan too. Israel's most urgent diplomatic mission today is to develop it in a strategy will outflank President Barack Obama in his final 8 weeks in power. Lobbying the administration, she says, is pointless. Obama has waited 8 years to exact his revenge on Israel for not supporting its hostile, strategically irrational policies. And he has no interest in letting bygones be bygones before turning to what Israel must do. First, we need to understand what Israel can do, And she goes through, you can read the article in Friday's Jerusalem Post. And she said, like, fighting at UNESCO is, you're not going to defeat these anti-Israel initiatives. They have too many votes. That's impossible, she says, given the Palestinians' automatic majority. The purpose of the fight at UNESCO is to humiliate European governments that side with anti-Semitic initiatives, and to weaken the congenitally anti-Israel body itself. In England this week, about 3 more minutes, there was a meeting convened by members of parliament from the Labour Party, including this Jenny Tong that I talked about this week. And at this meeting, a person got up and said, the Jews provoked Hitler to do the Holocaust. It was their fault. He finished, he goes, the Jews are just like the Islamic State. Islam has nothing to do with the Islamic State. Israel has nothing to do with Judaism. And the Jews provoked the Holocaust. At the end of his speech, you can watch the tape. You can watch the whole thing at the, it's the Palestinian Center Authority or something like that. It's all a Palestinian Return Center. They have a Facebook page. You can look at it. You can see the whole 45 minutes. Well, the audio is not real good, but you get the point. So Jenny Tong has now been forced out of the Labour Party, out of Parliament, and she's like, oh, I'm being abused and all this stuff. But this is all part of a piece, because what they want to do next year is very important. 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And now, what is it also? The 100th anniversary of the fall of Jerusalem under control of the Ottoman Turks to the British in World War II, and the 100th anniversary of a document called what? The Balfour Declaration. And so these groups, these Palestinian groups in England, are running around promoting the Balfour Apology campaign. And it's a bunch of leftists and that type of thing. So she's been shoved out of Congress. Also at the same time, there's this thing going on, these protests at a college in London. The Jewish students were forced to hide by the protesters. Dozens of police officers, the article says, were called to one of the country's top universities to quell a violent anti-Israel protest. This is while all this stuff is going on with Jenny Tong and the Labour Party. To call a violent anti-Israel protest which left Jewish students barricaded in a room after being told their safety could not be guaranteed if they were left alone. So back to Caroline's article. Safe in Washington's shadow, we have behaved, and I'm a little bit concerned about this, I'll tell you in a minute. Safe in Washington's shadow, we have behaved as through all the diplomacy as public diplomacy. That is, we have pretended that statecraft begins and ends with the making a moral strategic case for our side against the other guys, but public diplomacy is just one diplomatic tool. The Syrian regime, for instance, has no moral case for securing international support. Bashar Assad couldn't convince President Putin from Russia to support him by arguing that he is better than an alternative regime. He brought Putin's support by offering permanent air and naval bases in Syria. If Putin supports a balanced resolution, Obama will be checkmated. So what she's suggesting here is that Israel should line up with Putin. And they've already done this in some trade agreements. And this concerns me, okay? Because I have a futurist view of Ezekiel chapter 38. And so I'm a little bit concerned about this approach. Because of this passage in Ezekiel chapter 38. You know, it talks about a power from the north coming down in the end times against a land of unwalled villages that dwell safely, to take a spoil and to take a prey. And I'm just concerned that reaching out too much to Putin may look, this may be prophetic, okay? I don't want to see this stuff, you know, I have mixed emotions about it. Because I know this will be bad, and that the ultimate result of this will be the rise of a world leader that will severely persecute the Jewish people. And I know that's prophesied. I would prefer that they all got saved in advance and avoid that. But I'm just concerned about the approach of reaching out to Putin in this way, because I think that it sets up a way for him to come in to do this, to take a spoil and that type of thing. And we see this all the time. Look, I could go on for a long time, folks, because I've got a bunch more, but we need to go. So here is, the Cold War thing. A lot of propaganda out there on both sides. It's very hard to figure out. Putin's doing his interests. Turkey's coming down into Syria and Iraq and taking over land. Why? Because they want to keep the Kurds from expanding. The Kurds want this land to protect themselves against Turkey and Syria and Iraq. And it's a huge, big mess. And I think we need to really keep our eyes closely on that, because I think it will play out. And so, we need to pray for the people over there. Ultimately, we know that when the Messiah comes, there will be peace. But we need to get the gospel out to them in the meantime. So let's pray. Father, thanks again for your word. Lord, I just pray that you will give us all wisdom as we move forward this week. I'm seeing a lot of nastiness between Christian brothers and sisters. And I just pray that we will be able to operate in love, and that by whatever happens, our ultimate goal as Christians should be that you are glorified by fulfilling your prophetic word exactly as was written thousands of years ago. So God, fulfill your prophecies. In Jesus' name, amen.